afternoon. We have a great audience here that's kind of a blend between the DC Arts and Humanities Collaborative, as well as a number of Smithsonian educators across and some community colleagues. So it will make for a really fabulous conversation. Has everybody been in this theater before? Any new people in the theater? Raise your hands. That's great. I just wanted to mention, this is a really cool theater because everything is on wheels. These seats can push back, and we can do a whole variety of kinds of programs in here, and everything in Curious is also on wheels. So it's a very flexible space. It's quite fun, and it goes along with the way we'll be thinking about today, the flexibility between being a national organization and being a local organization. We can expand and contract in both directions. So this is the Carolyn W. Whitney Curious Science Education Center, which opened in 2013. And it was designed with input from and with teens, locally as well. So we had a lot of feedback into how this space could really address some of the needs of the community in lots of different ways, while also serving the national visitors who come into this museum as families and as individuals. This is the place where we have school groups, where we do next generation science standards-based programming, where our youth volunteers and our teen apprentices call home, and where we host our after-hours experimental programming for adult audiences regularly, and we also have a lot of family days in this space. Curious is a place where we frequently convene conversations, and we often discuss learning and engagement. We talk about natural history topics, and we also host dialogues about national, local, global, social, and environmentally relevant issues. So today's topic is really quite relevant for us to be hosting. Many of the organizations in this room have a dual mission to serve a national audience broadly, while also deeply engaging with local communities. How do we decide how to balance these issues, and how well are we doing? I imagine with these terrific panelists that will be here today, we'll have a wonderful time exploring this topic from many angles and with many deep insights. So I'm delighted that we are able to host this DC Arts and Humanities Education Collaborative event. We've been a member of this organization for many years, and we've always appreciated the support that you've provided in bringing schools to our programs. I want to wish you a happy 20th birthday. And here's to you and all you do to bring arts and humanities. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Lissa Rosenthal-Yapi, Executive Director of the Collaborative, and I want to thank you all for coming, participating today. Hi, everybody. I have to do this first. It's our birthday! Yay! So, who would have thought 20 years ago, in 1998, the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, the Kennedy Center, Humanities DC, DC Public Schools, and other community stakeholders would come together to identify a need and a purpose and a mission that endures and continues to this day. We have one of our founding board members and chair emeritus of the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities here. Thank you, Dorothy. I hope we're doing you proud as we're 20 years old and growing. Yes.
Much older than I am.
That's right. The organization, Dorothy was very young. So, at a very young 20, we're still young. We have opportunities to be vibrant and continue to rethink and shape what our future looks like into our adulthood, just as we look to do that with the students that we serve here in the district. So here we are in Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia. Washington, D.C. We're on the Mall. Thank you so much to Smithsonian and Sherry and your team for hosting today. So here at 20, we continue to take that deeper and inclusive look at who we are as a community. So this birthday is really all of ours. It's our entire community's birthday.
We continue to collaborate. Our name is DC Collaborative. The collaborative in our name is so important. The collective impact of the work that we do, the collaborative effect. What does it mean for us to serve public education in the district, and how should the DC Arts and Humanities Education Collaborative be in moving forward? Who are our partners? We have some wonderful representatives in both the public and private sector here today, representatives from the Culture Plan, institutions large and small. Today's conversation is a personal passion project for me. I know when I first arrived 3 years ago, I thought this very subject of what does it mean for us to be Washingtonians and residents of the district, and most importantly, how do we empower and ensure that our students, our youngest residents, take full advantage of every cultural institution in every neighborhood of the district, but in particular on the mall. This is where I think that comma is a wall. And we're going to talk about how we break that barrier down today. So let's continue together to advance this collective impact work and ensure that more students and their families are empowered to take full advantage and ownership of these amazing institutions that we work in every day. To help students learn and succeed through the arts and humanities here in our national city, our neighborhood of the District of Columbia. And not only do we have your support in all of us here today, and of course because it is our birthday, many leaders in the public sector also wanted to acknowledge the work we do. So I'd just like to read a quick letter that we received today from DC Councilmember David Grasso, who's the chair of the Committee on Education. From Dear Lissa, but I know he means dear everybody in the room. I want to congratulate the DC Collaborative on celebrating its 20th anniversary. I hope you will take this occasion to reflect with satisfaction on the organization's accomplishments, ensuring that the rich cultural resources of the nation's capital are accessible to all students in the District of Columbia is a goal that I share with you. I look forward to continuing our work with you as you build the success of the organization's first 2 decades. Sincerely, David Grasso. What a wonderful letter, and what an appropriate way to start today's conversation. So, without further ado, I would love to get this dialogue started. Here's the agenda. Whoops. Back one. Here's our agenda for today. The title of this program, More Than Cherry Blossoms. It should really be in addition to cherry blossoms. Because we actually have members of the National Cherry Blossom Festival here. Raise your hands. Yay! So it's in addition to cherry blossoms, and we really do sincerely mean in addition to cherry blossoms. Cherry Blossom Festival, the collaborative has had an opportunity to work with Cherry Blossom Festival and DC Public and Public Charter Schools on student art exhibits, family engagement opportunities to ensure that that internationally renowned festival is part of our neighborhood, part of our identity as residents of the District of Columbia. So thank you. So it's in addition to cherry blossoms we talk today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our board president, who will start the conversation, Ms. Linda Harper, and each panelist will come up after that. So thank you. And these are our panelists.
Should we mix it up? Let's mix it up.
Sorry, I'm for the theater friends. I know I'm doing something wrong. Okay, so
I think can you hear me in the back? Nobody has ever had a problem hearing me. But if we start to get low, would one of you back in those back rows wave at us? Oh, yay, okay. Oh, that's even better, because now I can talk like this. Okay, Lisa and I have laughed about this for a couple of years now, because I always said I wished that it was Washington and DC, as opposed to Washington, comma, DC, because I always felt like that comma was this thing that divided us rather than made us work together or be together or think about the city in some sort of common way. So I'm thrilled that you made that remark earlier, Lisa, about that, and that's where we're going today. So I'm going to start with each of the members up here. Actually, I'm not going to take time and introduce them. They're going to take a very quick moment, and I think most of you know them. So simply their name, their organization, and then they have a quick way to introduce themselves to you. Then we're going to get right into some Q&A. So Nick, I'm going alphabetical. You're an A. Go for it.
I'm Nick Apostolides. I'm the Deputy CEO of the U.S. Capitol Visitor Center and also serve as Vice President of the Board for the DC Collaborative. You can go on to the next slide. You can go on to the next one. So I put this up first because I know all of you have probably been to the U.S. Capitol, but how many of you have been there recently? And the answer is probably very few. I see a couple hands, which is great. But I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing to try to change that. So the national audience has never been a challenge for us to reach. You see our incredible tour guides and visitor guides behind me. We can go on to the next slide. But what are we trying to do to reach local visitors? And these are some of the programs that we have right now that I just wanted to mention by way of introducing me and the Capitol Visitor Center. Our exhibition, I can click. Our exhibition hall, which is our museum space, has new exhibits every 6 months. So if you haven't been to the Capitol Visitor Center in the last 6 months, you haven't seen our newest show, which is Congress and the World Wars. We do a lot of specialty tours that you've never heard of and you don't need a reservation. You actually can't make a reservation for. We do an outdoor tour of the Capitol grounds designed by Frederick Law Olmsted and his son. And those tours take place Monday through Saturday at 1. We are doing a new Family Thursdays program, which I'm really excited about. We're hoping to expand it to the weekends. We're building our education team, and Lauren Wyndham, our Rozak, our education program manager, is here in the audience. She can tell you more about that. But currently that's Thursdays at 11, so bring kids of all ages or people that just want to have fun, explore the Capitol with some special activities. We're doing a Talking Points and a Scene on Screen program at 1:30 on Fridays, depending on the day. You can check our calendar of events to learn more. We also are doing some specialty tours. We're doing a civil rights themed tour every day during the week, Monday through Friday at 1 p.m., Freedom Fighters. We're doing an art history kind of take on a tour of the Capitol called Halls of the Senate, Monday through Fridays at 11 and 2. And we're doing student programs for registered school groups. They're already, I think, full for this year, but you can check our website. They've been very popular on Environment Matters and Art Appreciators, so one that's kind of legislative based and one that's art based. And finally, we're doing teacher institutes, and our next teacher institute, you can see behind me, is it actually has to do with holidays, federal holidays, and where they Congress's role in federal holidays, and it's taking place this Saturday, November 4th. So finally, I just wanted to mention a couple other things, kind of new ground that we're breaking. We're doing some public programs, which are new for us, old to the rest of the Smithsonian, in terms of trying to align ourselves with the kind of programming that you all and so many organizations do. We did a program with Cokie Roberts on Women in Congress, and we're going to do more of those. We're renovating our museum space. We'll close it for renovation in 2019 and 2020. So we're trying to learn from Curious and all these amazing, exciting, innovative spaces around the Smithsonian, make our museum space even more engaging and participatory. And finally, we're doing some different programs. One that I'll mention, it's also happening this Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. Mornings at the museum, which we based in large part on what the Smithsonian has done for kids with autism and their families. This is the second program that we've held of that type, and we're really excited about that. And finally, we have a lot of shopping and dining activities, which are trying to appeal to local audiences, is another way that we try to connect with you all. And so we have great gift shops, we have great restaurant with lots of features and seasonal, actually monthly menu changes that feature different regions of the country. But I brought a little video, my final piece of introduction. And let's see, will this play? Do I just click or do I?
Is it in the center? No.
In the center.
Maybe not.
It's okay. So while this is loading up, just a way we're trying to reach out to local audiences and do something fun with our events. About a minute.
Hi, my name is William Bednar. I'm the Executive Chef of the Capitol Visitor Center. Here at the Capitol, one of our goals is to put an educational focus on our food, and what we try to do here at the cafe is tie in our food with the historical and educational values that are being done in the exhibits. The menu items were created, the mushroom meatloaf with the war bread and the flourless chocolate cake all tie into the Congress and the World Wars exhibit in the exhibition hall. We did do historical studies, and the recipe itself is our own, but we took ideas based on what were being done in the 40s. Our meatloaf is simple. Meat was scarce during World War II because we were trying to save it for the troops. So we decided to go half meat and half mushrooms on our meatloaf. And the flourless chocolate cake. Wheat was short, so there's no flour in it. If you would like more information, you can visit our website at visitthecapital.gov.
So we try to, if we can't get you any other way, we'll try to get you into your stomach.
Sarah, go for it.
Okay, hi. I'm Sarah Jenks. I'm Director of Education and Interpretation at Ford's Theater. We're a partner of the National Park Service, so we operate through an agreement that has almost been around for 50 years now. And because the National Park Service is national in scope and really sees itself primarily nationally, when I started just over 10 years ago, there were almost no programs for local audiences at Ford's. And honestly, I don't blame local people for not wanting to come onto our block. It's kind of unpleasant some of the time. And so we've really, when I started, the very first thing that I did was to reach out to DC schools. And we now have about 4,000 students a year from DC and within the Beltway come to visit us. We offer them free transportation, and we offer them special tours, which is something that the other 250,000 students who come to Ford's every year don't get. And it's really the way our programs have worked. Okay. So the way our programs have worked over time is that we've really taken a laboratory approach to local programming. We don't do things nationally that we haven't tried locally. And so this is a kind of a nutty way of looking at all of our programs, but we were trying to share what we do with the board, and this was the most effective way to do it. Because we're a working theater and a historic site, we have student matinees, we have historic site field trips, we have a lot of online resources because we're trying to reach people around the country, and we're a very small site physically, so that allows us to do more and tell more with exhibits and things than we would be able to otherwise. And so this is just to give you a general sense of what we do. We also, so having seen this monstrosity, I'll just share with you briefly some of what we've learned over the last 10 years and where we're going. So we strive for every program to integrate history, civics, and theater. And we know that's our sweet spot because we're a working theater and we're a historic site. In addition to that, we've really found these things to be true over time. And some of this we've learned through research, and others we've just come to understand it over time. So we use our local programs as a lab. We did a summer teacher institute for teachers just in DC before we started offering one nationally. And then the DC one remains completely free for local teachers. Additionally, we offer an oratory festival here. We now offer an online oratory festival as well that anybody around the country can go to. But we still do 2 special days with lots of teaching artist visits for people here, kids here in the district and in Prince George's and Arlington, etc. So I'm not going to go through all of this piece by piece, but I just want to say the main way that we've reached out to and kind of built relationships with teachers is through, with students and teachers is through the teachers. We really capitalize on teachers as a way to reach more kids There's only a limited number of kids who can come to the theater every year, but if we can connect with teachers, not only do they then go back and teach their kids and teach more every year, but in addition, they tend to tell other people, other teachers in their networks, and it spreads. So that's been the most success for us. I'm very lucky in that I have been really strongly encouraged to build both a local program and a national program. And I know that isn't true for the Park Service, for instance, as much, and for organizations that have more of a national focus. But it's allowed us to try things for a lot less money than if we were trying to start nationally at the beginning.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to just jump through. Oh, no, went right past it. I'm going to speak a little more philosophically about our work at the Kennedy Center, and I'm delighted. First of all, I should say my name, Jeanette McCune. I'm the Director of School and Community Programs at the Kennedy Center, and I've been there for 16 years, and I've been a member of the DC Arts and Humanities Collaborative Board for a very long time. I'll leave it at that. As I shared, I wanted to just speak a little bit philosophically with you about the Kennedy Center programs, because the one thing that I will say about our work is that I believe we've been very intentional and thoughtful about our role as both a local and national organization from the beginning. The fact that we have a performance and subscription series and recognize that engagement ongoing with the local community is a big part of our work has trickled down certainly to our engagement with schools. I also want to mention two colleagues who are here calling out that manage all of our registration for school performances and professional development, Liz Rossetti and Charlotte Maurice. They build outstanding relationships with our educators with more than 70,000 seats dedicated for school performances annually and more than 50 teacher workshops in professional development. So just kind of giving you a big picture, we just celebrated our 46th birthday at the Kennedy Center, and we're really focused on, again, that duality of our role as both a local and national institution. So this opening statement about where our goal is to serve every art form, every age, everywhere. Our model programs start here, and we try to take our learnings on a national level. The question that guides us is, as the nation's performing arts center, since that is our moniker, what's our unique role in arts and education across the country, but that includes here. We are one of three pillars. We're the memorial to John F. Kennedy. We are focused on world-class arts, and the third pillar, which we're so excited was actually uplifted in our strategic plan, is powerful education. So as that powerful education goal is uplifted, we talk about our mission as setting the national bar for arts learning, creativity, and accessibility by providing powerful, culturally relevant experiences for all. And we're very focused on eradicating barriers. As my colleagues here have mentioned, the Kennedy Center has a deep relationship with DC Public Schools, sponsoring and supporting, among a number of things, our annual music festival, 22 in-depth deep partnerships, including professional development, performances, and artist in schools programs. And so we're deeply interested in learning and continuing to work closely with DC Public Schools to help guide our thinking and our work on a national level. Just a quick little visual that might help you. So we had a graphic organizer, person, artist who came and worked with us, and we uplifted sort of three big ideas about our work. One was the focus on the art form, and so you could read this like a spoken word piece, but basically we're very interested in the Kennedy Center being a noisy, engaging place. To that end, one of the newest things that we've added is a second Saturday series, collaborating with a number of organizations that are here in our community, because we recognize that partnerships and collaborations are critically important, sort of showcasing the great work that happens across the city and connecting to the Kennedy Center. We're very focused on our people, recognizing that education is not just a big E, pre-K to grade 12, but education across a lifetime. Lifelong learning is something that we definitely value, and beginning to create and deepen those relationships from the earliest age all the way throughout a person's lifetime is what we deeply care about. And our partnerships and relationships are also a big focus, so you'll see that at the bottom of our screen. And I'll share this delightful piece with you and send it to Lisa for sharing. In terms of the organization of the Kennedy Center in education, we basically have 5 major areas. We have a research and evaluation arm that's part of the Kennedy Center's program that helps us look at the field at large and figure out how best to approach our resources and programs to meet the needs both of the field and to hopefully move the field in new directions. Arts Edge is our digital media learning lab and online resources. including podcasts, digital learning experiences for young people and educators. VSA Accessibility, which is our third area, focuses on special education and accessibility work and provides a significant amount of consultation and support to other institutions. So again, we believe our role is not only to support our own programs, but across the country. Education programs and productions are the performances and events that we have, including the Saturday series, our school workshops, performances and events for families. And last but not least is the area that I lead, which is our school and community programs, looking at our relationships on a local and national level, being intentional and thoughtful about our relationships, what we're learning, how we're sharing with each other as community of practices across the country, and making sure that the Kennedy Center not only offers its best on a national level, but locally. And this is our impact map, which we're still continuing to work on. And you'll see that there's a deep number of partnerships in the DC area. That is our deepest relationship, because being an institution that resides in the district is the one that we feel we have the deepest engagement with. So our DC Public School Partnerships is there, VSA affiliates, Any Given Child, which is and DC has just joined as our 25th city, looking at collective impact and equity and access across the city. Turnaround Arts, which recently joined our family from the President's Committee for the Arts and Humanities, and Partners in Education. So we really embrace the duality of our work, and we're delighted to be a part of the collaborative and all that it has to offer. And I'll pass it to my colleague, Greg.
Thank you. So I'm Craig McGruder. I'm Vice President for Live Events at the National Geographic Society. And I've been at National Geographic for 30 years. And been working with live events since 1989. So let me ask you a question. When I say National Geographic, what do you think of? Just yell it out. Magazine. All right. Photography. Okay, there's a lot of people are doing, say, magazine, but increasingly now, when you ask people what she said TV. She said TV too. Yes, all live events, but there's all this other stuff beyond the magazine. And if I were talking to a group of millennials, none of them would say the magazine. And that kind of is an example of our challenge and also the possibilities. Let's go to this slide here, but I'm going to play this video first. Do I need to?
Yeah.
Here. That looks fantastic. You got the fossil, huh? The inscription's right here. There are? Yes.
So here's the thing. This is a video for National Geographic Society. This is the nonprofit arm of the National Geographic. 2 years ago, we were reorganized, and now we are two organizations operating under one umbrella. Our partners are National Geographic partners, and that is a joint venture between the National Geographic Society's media arm and also 21st Century Fox, but we all work together as one. And this next video will demonstrate how that comes about.
There are those who believe you need something special to be an explorer. Some rare quality that the rest of us do not share. But after 129 years of exploration, we have found that all you really need to be an explorer is curiosity. And we are all curious. We are all searching for what surprises us, inspires us, and pushes us further. This is not a journey for just a special few. It's for every one of us. We are all explorers.
So all these last numbers kind of speak to the reach that we are able to achieve as a result of that partnership. And also, because they're 21st Century Fox and National Geographic partners, they can get Morgan Freeman to do the voiceover. So this offers a lot of challenges for us. I'm doing these programs in a local place, doing live events at our headquarters. It's a 400-seat auditorium. This is the programs I oversee, National Geographic Live. We do about 60 events a year. We do primarily lectures, but we do films, and we partner with local organizations. I see people from the Environmental Film Festival right here, they've been a partner with us for 25 years. But then we also have the museum here as well. So the question is, how do we all work together? Because our partners are about making money, and the heart and soul of what it is we do is to support scientific research and education, and also storytelling. And it sounds like it's impossible to make happen and make work, but it does. So many of these people who we have given grants to, who you saw in the films, the grants come through the nonprofit side. Those people end up on the National Geographic Channel, in National Geographic magazine, or in National Geographic publications. And when they are there, then I do a talk with them in our auditorium, or our museum director will create an exhibition. So it's this wonderful cycle that happens. So, and we get, the nonprofit side gets 27% of the profit that is made by our partners. So it's a wonderful way that makes everybody hold hands and sing Kumbaya. We like to say that right now we're at, I'm going to say one more thing. We are a 130-year-old startup. That's the way we describe what we're doing now. All right.
Yeah, I'm Barbara Stauffer, Chief of Community Programs here at the Natural History Museum. I've also been at my job for 27 years, almost 28, and lived in DC for almost 30. And I'm the mother of a son who was born in DC, went through the DC school system. And I work in a natural history museum, so I'm going to tell you a story of evolution. The museum opened over 100 years ago, just a little, 1910, as the National Museum. It was designed to house collections from expeditions, the nation's art collection, pretty much everything that Congress acquired. But it has evolved quite a bit since then. We now are focused on natural history and anthropology collections. Our mission is understanding the natural world and our place in it. The collections are 126 million, and annual visitation is about 7 million. So we've grown quite a bit. Of our visitors, 10% are international and approximately 80% are from the United States, but not the local area, which leaves about 10% local. In the winter, we get maybe up to 15% local, but it's really not a very large percentage. But my career here started in temporary exhibitions, and I used to always say 10% of 7 million is 700,000 people, and we should be thinking about them. So there's been really the focus has been national for a very, very long time, and it had to be in a lot of ways. But we have a director now, he started 5 years ago. Kirk Johnson came from a museum that had a very, very strong set of volunteers, local programs, and he started asking, why are we not doing the same? So kind of the community programs branch where I am kind of grew out of that. And local audiences are actually mentioned in our strategic plan for the first time ever. So it's exciting. And again, I kind of mentioned that I've lived here as long as I have, and I have a son who are based here, because in my time here, I came because of the Smithsonian's national reputation, but in my time here, I thought this is my city. Now I do want to say it's not as though we hadn't been engaging local audiences at all. We've had school programs for decades. We've had a really robust volunteer program. We have close to 7,000 volunteers. We've had family festivals. We've hosted programs. We have had offered a lot of things for local audiences. And we have a youth program that's been in place for almost 10 years. But just in the past few years, kind of with local audiences called out, we're really working to be more intentional and more strategic in how we engage local audiences. And that has to do with kind of really knowing who's coming, getting feedback from them, working with partners to really identify audiences that we would like to reach and working together to reach those. So it's kind of working differently, and what we'd like to do is kind of expand and deepen that engagement as we move forward. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Well, I'm going to follow up immediately from what you just said about the fact that your director is sort of directing you to do this. And one of the questions I had was, as I listened to you all, where is this initiative for local coming from? Is it being driven at the board level or at the director level? Or is it being driven by, is it coming up or down? Is the staff directing it down? Do they recognize a trend, something they want to do in the city? Or is it the staff that's getting it and wanting to move it into a more local phenomenon? Nick?
Well, it's definitely been a priority of mine since I was at the Smithsonian before I came to the Capitol, the Portrait Gallery, and because we're one of the few Smithsonian museums that's not on the mall, but is in the middle of town. They had a Costic Community Museum and some others. So, and having grown up here, so I would say that, there are folks at the leadership level that take it seriously at the Capitol, but I do think our staff also have a real interest in seeing more of their neighbors and friends know that the Capitol is accessible to them.
Oh, sure. I think it's a combination, honestly. There have been times when leadership at the Kennedy Center has been very focused on our national initiatives, but our congressional mandate actually included local as well as national. It's embedded in our planning from the beginning of the process. And I think that we've always recognized, both from the staff level as well as at the senior leadership and board level, that an ongoing engagement with our local community is incredibly important. And that, in fact, again, thinking, as Sarah said so beautifully, that we laboratory many of the experiences here to share that on a national level. So that's been really critical.
I just wanted to echo the fact that it's both, from our director, but also just in a recent meeting, staff working in the education office were just saying that the local programming is really wonderful because you actually get a more direct and immediate feedback and response and interactions with your audience.
In terms of this idea of laboratory that Jeanette was speaking about, first of all, I think that language may have come directly from Darrell Ayers, who was the former Vice President of Education at the Kennedy Center. He and I had a conversation quite a while ago, and we were already doing things this way, but those were his words. The other thing, though, is that using that language of laboratory has been really important to our being able to convince the board that it's important to be local as well as national. They're very focused on national and even trying to think internationally, and for us to say we need the local programs to do the national programs right has been an effective strategy.
While you have that,
And I have one too.
Whoa, that's a really scary thought. Okay. We've tossed this, we're working locally, or we're using local. Define local for me. When you say we're working locally, what is that?
Well, I can speak. We define it in a couple of different ways. The first, probably most important way, is that we offer free transportation to any school within the Beltway, within the Capitol Beltway. Outside of that, we do any school that is coming to us from commuter distance. We'll try to partner with them in some way. That's a little bit more advanced than our national visits, and that's true of teachers as well. Any teacher who can commute to and from Ford's is welcome at our Summer Teacher Institute locally, which means it's free for them.
The answer's pretty similar. I would say for adult evening programs, we're looking at Richmond and beyond, people who are willing to drive in for a program. And then schools are just the DC school systems and the surrounding school districts. But it's still something that we have a lot of conversations about.
So I think our local is also national and international, because programs that begin at our headquarters sometimes go to, we're doing lectures in some 37 cities around the world. We're doing lectures that started off in the auditorium at headquarters in New Zealand, Australia, Singapore as well. And we've also got so much of many of the explorers who we support. We've made an intentional effort to set up these base camps around the world. I was just in Mozambique earlier this month, teaching explorers how to do public speaking, part of our science telling boot camp, where we travel all around the country and all around the world, training scientists to be better communication. So once again, as I showed you with those first two slides, we're in this interesting position where everything is overlapping, and instead of getting mad because you can't get what you want, you have to figure out how you can get what you can and make it work.
Let me ask, maybe the follow-up on that then is, so is there a difference in the way you measure success between your local initiatives and your national initiatives when you're talking about 7 million or you're talking about lectures in Mozambique? What kind of benchmarks are you using that you can manage that with? Jeanette, do you want to?
Sure. Oh, I take yours. Okay. So it's interesting because I think you have to fight the impulse that that there is sameness, and there really isn't. I think from our perspective, we sometimes look at reach and impact in other communities that looks a little bit different. So we think about, in this case, the intentionality of the program and the outcomes, particularly when we're doing national programs. How do we activate and support communities in doing the work that's best for themselves? That community of practice is really important. But on a local level, where we recognize that we have the opportunity for multiple engagements and multiple impacts, engaging with communities again and again and again. And so we look at it in a much more deep way. We look at to the degree that we can impact a person's life over time, not just now. And in fact, we want to recognize that, in fact, that is the long game, particularly for those who live here, for them to stay and feel like the Kennedy Center is something that they can engage with. So we try to differentiate who our partners are and then try to look at that in a different way. But sometimes there's an impulse, and I'm sure many of you are just going to speak openly and honestly. Some people will try to say, okay, well, how many people did you reach? And although there's an interest in learning about what the deeper impact and ongoing engagements is, oftentimes we'll get an external, either funder or other who wants to say, okay, what's the total number? And then you have to continue to fight to say, no, that is not, this is a different type of program. What we're talking about is being an ongoing engager, an ongoing curiosity and instigator in a community's life. And so you have to look at that differently. So it's a bit of our responsibility to push back against just numbers only.
And I can add to that. I mean, as you saw, I mean, I've got partners who, you know, the platforms, the things that they do, 760 million people a month look at that in 172 countries around the world. Okay, I've got my 400-seat auditorium, all right, and I get 30,000 people per year. Our museum gets about 70,000 people a year. So the challenge is just, you know, their knee-jerk response is to roll their eyes when you tell them that. But I always tell them that is a good 400 people in my auditorium. And I think we have the opportunity to deepen the engagement, and that's what we are working at now. Deepening the engagement, asking the question, just spending an hour with the photographer, with the film in our auditorium, inspire you to make a change, because our ultimate goal is to give people tools so they can make a change in their lives and in the world for a sustainable future.
Yeah, you know, I completely agree with everything that these other folks have been saying. We find that we have an opportunity to help students and teachers to take ownership over the city, and that's a huge goal for us, is that sense of ownership, that these places that are seen as national belong to them, that this is their city. However, you know, I guess an example I want to give is that we finally this year, and this took 10 years to do, so just anybody out there who hasn't been able to crack the DCPS nut yet, 10 years, have developed a unit in partnership with DCPS for 5th grade around Civil War. And we were like super excited to do this. We've had these long conversations, we've been working with them closely. And my boss got very, very excited about this. And I said to him, I just want you to understand that even if we served every 5th grader in DCPS, it would be like 3,500 students. And he was just sort of crestfallen. He was like, that's not very many people. And I said, it's true, but you know, we have like 7 school districts that are considered local to us, and DCPS also, or DC also has 40% of their students in charters where you can't get any kind of economy of scale in terms of reaching out to them. We all know these problems. And so trying to share those details and help get people to understand how difficult it is to work in this local community, it's tough and it takes time.
So I don't really, I mean, I agree with what, and deal with what everybody talked about, all the other panelists. I guess just one example, I mean, you really have to kind of match your message to the program in that we have, you know, we get 7 million visitors a year. We reach 7,000 or 8,000 people with our adult evening programs at this point, hope to grow that. Our youth intern program, our YES program, is for 25 students over the course of the summer. but the intensity of that engagement that they're getting, and we do evaluation, and we're able to show that it kind of changes their thinking about science and their identification as scientists. I mean, that's what you have to do, but it's kind of, value. There are added steps and added costs, but you have to really show that it matters.
Following sort of along that, these obviously numbers are an internal tension that you have to deal with. Are there other internal tensions in this national, local format? Are there other things that you struggle with every day to make sure these things happen, other than just that number issue?
Yeah, the other thing, before we, when I create my programs, and all of us create our programs, so we've got to go through this whole budgeting system, and we also have to, and as part of this system, putting everything through a rubric, and that also includes metrics and evaluation. And this is a division that looks at everything like with the green eye shade, and they're asking, well, did the fact that this person came to your talk, did that change them? I don't know, but it might change them 25 years from now. And so the challenge is trying to look at what they want and being able to answer that question and keep moving ahead. We do have subjective evidence that shows that people have made changes in their lives. And you hear from students, you hear from people who, as a result of going to a film, quit their job as a government attorney, rode across the country to California where they're working in, on a farm or something like that. But that is the tension that I think is part and parcel of what all of us have to deal with, the metrics for success. Sometimes it doesn't account for numbers as low as I have in my auditorium. So you've got to come up with another thing that's going to satisfy people.
I would just add in that the degree of customization and effort is something that people don't always want to take into consideration. And so when you're working with a local jurisdiction, there's an expectation that they're delighted to have whatever you have. They should take whatever you give, and that's really not enough. If we're talking about wanting to be responsive community partners, there is a significant amount of effort that goes into it, but you have to believe that the transformation doesn't only happen for those you're working with, but for yourself. And if you're thinking about the work in that way, you're willing to make that type of investment. With DC, I started local only and now expanded the portfolio to national. But I will say that in the years of working with DC Public Schools, it's been more than worth it to have these delightful conversations with educators, with students, with principals, about what are their hopes and dreams about connecting to this city, not being disconnected and disenfranchised, but actually feeling like this is a place for them. And in fact, they're advocates and ambassadors for the city in a much larger way. That's something that makes the city more attractive as both a local and a national city. We have a youth council that we started a little over a year and a half ago, 25 students, and immediately, well, what are you going to do with the students? I was like, I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to talk to them, I'm going to find out what teens are interested in. First year, I only had 12 students. This year, I have 25. I said there is a sweet spot for working with young people so that they have agency and voice and matter. I said, and we're going to be really intentional and thoughtful about perspectives. But again, making that deep investment and understanding that if you want to have the type of return on that investment and feel like you're part of something bigger than just a one-time program, or it's just about the number of people that are in the seats, you're talking about being able to impact the ways that this work happens in other communities. And if you think about it like that, our institutions might be touchstones, but we're talking about ideologies, about what an investment means, what it means to be part of the community, and we all are part of this community in addition to serving those that are outside of it.
So I'll be blunt. Communications and marketing and education had a really serious sort of dispute. That's not fair. It was silent. It wasn't out loud, but there was a silent sort of hate that lasted for many years. And I think what changed that for us finally was when I started going to lunch on a monthly basis with the director of communications, and she started understanding what we did better. That didn't mean that she was being held accountable for any of our numbers. I mean, her evaluation is still based on how many tickets she sells to the theater. You know, that's understandable in some ways because that's where the money comes from. However, money also comes from foundations and corporations and individuals, and they very often want to fund education. And so, you know, what I think the biggest struggle for us has actually been, so we got over that hump. Now what we're dealing with is trying to figure out how to communicate the results of what we're doing. And that's hard. It's really hard. And my department is asked to do it most of the time, but since we're doing the programs, it can be really hard for us to also communicate the impact of the programs. We don't have the time, and B, we don't have the distance. So I do think that those issues exist within organizations, and especially the relationship between education departments and development and communications. And over time, things can get better, but it takes a lot of work.
Can I jump back in for a second, because you just pointed out something really important, and that's also getting the attention of the institution for those individual stories. There's often time and interest for those individual stories, but that means that you have to dedicate time for press. You have to dedicate time for media to come and follow you, to follow those stories. So getting that seen as important, instead of asking you at the end of the year, I'd love to see your great stories and photos. I'm like, well, that means you have to come. You have to come and you have to actually follow us in this process and understand what those deep relationships are. But that doesn't happen magically. So, you know, especially when you're selling tickets and you're focused on monetizing, that's a whole other deep conversation. But I will mention that the monetization is certainly a big deal. This idea that earned income is somehow more important than contributed income, which I confer, that is just absolutely not true. When you break down your institutions and you see that in most cases the viability is around that contributed income of people that are focused on how you are hopefully impacting your community in a positive way. So it's really aligning those and be willing, and honestly you just have to fight for it to a large degree. I know it sounds like we were doing in there, doing battle, and you were very nice about it, Sarah, but it's very true. You have to advocate for the things that you need so that you can actually help tell the stories that will contribute to more resources and more viability for your organization.
Okay, I have one last question for the panel, and then we're going to turn it over to you all. So begin to think about what you want to ask them. I'm sure some of you have already written down questions, and that's a good thing. My last question to you is, we've talked about teachers' workshops. We've talked about getting students at performances. It's all very close. What do you think the role for technology, video, media, all types of new things are, and how is that going to impact what you do at the local level?
Well, technology is absolutely already transformed what all of these organizations on the stage, and I'm sure all of you in the audience as well, are doing. It's obviously hard to even keep up with how fast that rate of change is. But I think we're all committed in our organizations and those here to providing people access to the real thing, whether it's a live performance or an interaction with a live expert or an object or art or whatever the case may be. So I think technology, we at the U.S. Capitol Visitor Center are actively exploring and experimenting with virtual reality, with augmented reality, anything we can get our hands on, but we never want to substitute the experience of having people come and if you've been in the Capitol Rotunda, the awe and the grandeur of that space, and the imagination that it fires in you for what our democracy can be, and for people to take an active role and be a part of their democracy. And our vision is to preserve democracy one visitor at a time. We don't think we can do that if we can't draw people into the place where it happens, to steal a line from Hamilton.
I was going to say, I shamelessly exploit technology to deal with the kind of green hat situation, because if you have a program that reaches X number of people and then you are able to live stream it or make it available digitally in some way, you can vastly increase the numbers, knowing that the experience of being there is obviously more impactful and the conversation afterwards is very important, but it does help with the numbers. And then I'm going to call out Ben Taylor over there, who works on our youth programs. And there, I think they've done a great job of integrating the technology into a way of increasing the reach, so that the students, the interns for the summer actually get science communication training, and they develop a presentation which is then made available and something they can distribute and share with their schools, and it's also online. So that's more integrated than, you know, my just film it and put it online approach.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. We were, everything that we have done in the time that I've been at Ford's probably doesn't equal the number of visitors or the number of hits we got on a virtual field trip that we did in partnership with Discovery Education, because the president of our board wanted it to happen. And that makes everybody on the board very happy. It was a huge amount of work, and I felt like the impact was limited, but we did reach a huge, huge number of people in comparison to to what we normally do. And so it's a fine balance. And I do think, again, trying to use the idea of the intensity of the local programs is as a way to then think about what's best that we want to project onto a national, on a national scale.
I would just add, I think that we try to embrace a hybridization, particularly locally. I think that, especially when we're talking about a space where you welcome, and again, just being blunt, those who can afford to come to our institution, who are we to say that we do not have a responsibility to make the institution affordable and accessible to the community that lives here? So if we are addressing a hybridization where there are things that can happen on an individual level at home, what are the tools and resources that we can provide digitally, but how do we make sure that wonder, that awe, that democracy of having an institution that is fully embraceable and reachable for those who live here is an incredibly important thing. So I think, you know, being willing to understand that yes, there are some extended learning experiences that can happen at a digital level, but not supplanting the opportunity to be directly engaged in the content.
And we believe in that all the technology works to the other technologies' advantage, and also to the live events, to the in-person experiences. 25 years ago, people were predicting that with the advent of the digital age, that our lecture series was going to close down. It's only grown, as have other lecture programs around the world, and what has been propelling them is the internet. You know, we do Facebook Live broadcasts of our shows. Our education department does these in-classroom teachings with some of our explorers. Last week we did our first virtual reality lecture, and it took us 3 days to set it up, but boy, it was worth it, and it showed us the possibilities. And so it was the VR, but there was a live person there. And so I think there's a way to make all of it work together.
All right, so I hope you've enjoyed this discussion thus far, and now I'm looking forward to what you're going to provoke the panelists with. So, questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Kathy Riley, and I work with a group of DC Public High Schools. And I'm all my children graduated from DC. P.S. I first want to really acknowledge and thank what you do, and say you don't get to see the alumni, but I have my youngest son is a dancer, and the first dance he ever saw was at the Kennedy Center on a field trip, and we never took him to any dance, but now we go to a lot of dances. So, you know, I really appreciate it, and my oldest son was in the first geography bee, and the geography bee after that, and it affected his life, all the people he met from all around the country, and the sense of being part of that. So what you do is so important, and locally and nationally, I think the humanities are under threat. You know, from my perspective as an advocate within the public schools, the pressure to teach to a test, and to also say that what you're doing is going to give you a job afterwards, instead of that it's going to expand the quality of your life for the rest of your life, and it's going to make you a better citizen.
And do you have a question for the panel?
Yes, my question is for all of you. You know, how can you support us in advocating for the presence of the humanities in our high school requirements and in the knowledge that it's more important than just how you perform in English?
Thank you. Good question. So do the national institutes have a responsibility to advocate at the local level?
Well, you know, it's interesting you brought that up, and I was telling Melissa just to write down everything that you said so it could go on the DC Collaborative website, because it was a wonderful testimonial. But I think, you know, it's interesting that you bring that, because last week we started doing our strategic planning for the DC Collaborative, and that is something that came up. The importance of the humanities and helping people become good global citizens, and not looking at how we educate people, education as a quid pro quo situation. If you do this, you will get this job. You know, but just to encourage thinking, or, you know, let people know, like your son, you know, he's a dancer now. The effect that the geography bee had on your child's life. Those are the stories that we think need to be lifted up to foster this support of the humanities. You know, it is good to be an English major. It is good to study the arts. It doesn't mean you have to be an artist, but, you know, you look at DC, there are people involved in the performing arts, and it is an industry here. And most people do not know what's in it.
Greg, let me bring it back to the question, though, of advocacy. Do these national institutions believe that they have a role in local advocacy?
I want to speak to that, if that's all right. We're part of lots of national organizations, but through the American Association for State and Local History, and also the American Alliance of Museums, I have become very involved in advocacy. And on the local level, you know, I'm also involved with arts advocacy. And I do think it's crucial. I think what our responsibility is to, and especially working with teachers, to partner with the teachers that we have relationships with nationally and get them to feel confident enough about speaking about the power and viability, the importance of history in their classrooms. And the arts also. I used to work primarily in arts education, and I had no idea how endangered the history curriculum was until I moved into history. But the other thing that I would say is the humanities are essential to our democracy, and our democracy is arguably in danger at the moment. And I think the fact that we are currently talking about career as the only thing that schools should do, that education should do, is dangerous. And I'm very comfortable saying that, and I'm comfortable sharing it with our teachers, and it's through those teachers, that, for me, that I think I can do the most advocacy work by arming them.
I would just mention that sometimes our institutions, we cannot directly advocate. And so through that means, I mean, as a national institution, that is, we just cannot. But what we hopefully can do is help to present a case for why it's viable for humanity, which is the bigger issue. So to the degree that we have evidence, to the degree that we have stories from those who have participated either directly or those who are around them, what we can do is help to share and to help you uplift those stories so that you can go and be an advocate for yourself. And I do believe that certainly arming our young people whose voices are so critically important and who have a chance for shaping and supporting others to be able to tell their stories, that's why the investment in the Youth Council makes sense. When young people are saying, my education matters, my education more than just what happens in the classroom, but my connection to the city, my becoming a citizen, what does that mean to me? When I can speak to the fact that being invested in a city, especially one that's so culturally rich as this one, but the strongest areas of advocacy actually come from those who use it, not those who produce it, because it seems very self-serving.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Kendall Bill, and I work at Apple Tree Early Learning Public Charter School, and we primarily service 3 to 4-year-olds. So I'm really interested to see if your programs will allow some direct access to support children at that early age and stage in their education. The district, their views in support of early childhood has changed dramatically, And so, are there plans for your programs to align with that new invested interest? And what are some examples of creating access for that level?
Yeah. For those of you who didn't hear the first part of that, it's about very early childhood access, 3 and 4 year olds, yes, or very young, yes, pre-K to 12. Yeah. What's the role there for your organization?
Sure. We've got a space called Q Junior, which is actually for that young age. And we are just starting, actually I didn't mention this when I gave the overview, but we're really, one of the things we want to do is start thinking more about family programs and how we can develop them and build them. So it's not there yet, but the conversation's starting.
I encourage you to go and ask places that you don't know. We don't advertise an early childhood program at Ford's, but we have one because 2 schools, SEEK, the Smithsonian Early Education Center, and also Inspired Teaching Public Charter School, both approached us and asked us if we could do something, partly because we offer free transportation, and they wanted to do a field trip. And we ended up developing a program, and we don't currently advertise it because it's fairly staff heavy for us, and we offer it for free, but if you call us, we'll do it for you. So definitely it's worth asking, even if you don't see something advertised.
That was the plan B after I heard.
Okay. Well, I'll also mention that for us at the center, we're very aware of the need to engage early childhood as part of our programming, so we include that in our series. And I have to say that once pre-K 3 and 4 were added to the public schools, we made sure that was part of the vernacular. For many years it was K-12, like it's not just K-12 now. Yeah. If we're making an investment as a nation in early childhood education and democratizing that particular component, then we need to offer formal education opportunities for that. That plus the family series of programs where we're trying to bring families in more, but we have teddy bear concerts and programs that are for early childhood, so we're trying to build that intentionally and building those family connections so that our youngest visitors can start earlier. So the demand has definitely been shared, and we are trying to be responsive to that.
Jeanette, can I bring my teddy bear the next time I come to the Kennedy? That has such a wonderful image to it. Okay.
Just to piggyback on, we welcome audiences of all ages, and as Jeanette was saying, we see that young pre-K kind of audience at the Capitol all the time. That's part of the reason why we created our Family Thursdays program and hope to expand it, and with our new education programs. Also for our, so kids that age are welcome at our Family Thursdays program, 11 o'clock. We're also with our museum renovation project that we're looking to open in 2021. We're looking to create a discovery center or space as a part of that museum experience that will be for kids of all ages, but including a parent with a very young child. So it's something we're looking at. It's in the planning stages now, but that's definitely an audience that we're looking to serve as well.
And the next question is somewhere out there.
I was going to add to that question. Our publishing division does publish books for young kids as well as our digital side too, and TV too. And locally, what we're doing, we're starting family programs next season in our building at headquarters, realizing that there is an audience that we haven't been serving.
Cool.
Thank you.
Okay, and that question is right.
First, thank you very much. This is so wonderful, and thank you for all of the questions. My name is Sylvia. I'm a DC PS teacher and also work at Sitar Arts Center. So today I'm here through Sitar Arts Center. I imagine that, of course, all the family programs that you're creating, and there is definitely a new understanding of early childhood and family programming throughout the nation, and I think the world, of the importance of that early learning. In the local level, however, just of what you've mentioned, Lisa, there is a comma and there is a wall there. If there is that conversation trying to identify, because even those families that will be coming to these programs are somewhat self-selected, or some that we were able to reach, and yet I find the mall and all the things that are offered in DC so accessible, and we still have just 10% on a museum like this that you would imagine everybody would want to come. So just identifying the causes of why such low interest from the local level to the programs.
So I'd like to address this in perhaps a little bit of a provocative way, but since I've thought a lot about this wall with the local community and having been from DC, and I think also you have to delve a little bit deeper into what, to Linda's earlier question, the local community means, and where the greatest obstacles are in terms of accessibility to our institutions. So let me just tell a very brief story, which I shared with some of my colleagues, which I started to look into the issue of segregation in the US Capitol building. Because I think what underlies a lot of this wall really gets back to a history of segregation and of course of enslavement as well. And I could not find in the photo archives any images of segregation in the Capitol building. I couldn't find any water fountains with signs that said white and colored. I couldn't find any bathrooms, you know, the same kind of thing. Any images that showed the institution of segregation. And what I found out through my research was that the segregation occurred before anyone ever came, not only into the building, but onto the grounds of the Capitol. So until the 1840s or so, there was a black code in the District of Columbia, and it was actually illegal for persons of color to come onto the grounds of the US Capitol. And this came up when I was talking with some colleagues at the Visitor Center and also with some other colleagues here at the Smithsonian, actually, African Americans who expressed a kind of hesitation to coming to the Capitol that they couldn't quite put their finger on. And I think that's something we need to call out. We need to put our finger on it. We need to talk about, in forums like this, with our colleagues, we need to be explicit about what some of those barriers and that resistance, that comma or that wall might stem from. And in the District of Columbia, a lot of it does get back to issues of race. And I think I'm very proud of the work that my colleagues have done at the Capitol over the years. The great hall of the Capitol Visitor Center, it was renamed Emancipation Hall. And there's a marker there, and we tell the story of the enslaved African Americans from this area who built the Capitol, and our civil rights tour, which is very popular. But I think we need to be more explicit about looking. I think race is still, that is still the great unfinished work in our country, and it's the same case here in the District of Columbia. And I think if we're going to reach everyone in the city and get everyone equitable access to the incredible resources of these public and private institutions, public institutions that their tax dollars have paid for, we have to be willing to have those conversations and seek to break down those barriers and invite everyone in and make everyone feel welcome. I think a lot of times we're simply not making that kind of invitation and warm welcome to our community.
Oh my God, give that to me. Okay, sorry. Sorry, invited and welcome. Thank you for saying that. No, oh my gosh, yeah, that was the number one thing I would mention. My colleagues are laughing at me because they know that that's like, but the idea of being invited and welcomed is absolutely critical. And most of the times, the invited and welcomed means you actually have to leave your institution and go into the communities that you're talking about working with and say, please come. We want you to come. You cannot sit in your space and assume that people feel welcome. And most of the time, you have to make sure that the content that you have is something that you've at least prepared people for. I cannot say enough over my years. When I first started working on our partnerships with DC schools, I had so many young people who would say to me, and educators say, I've never been there. I don't know what to expect. I don't want to look foolish. I don't want to be the only one there. I don't want people to look at me strangely. Those are real psychological barriers to access. It's not just about money. It's about feeling like you matter, that you're invited, and that someone cares about you being there. Not for numbers, but because you are valued as a human being. And the only way to do that is to make sure that you actually go into those spaces and invite people where maybe sometimes you're a little uncomfortable. It's okay. Just imagine how our folks feel who haven't been to our institutions, which are shiny and beautiful and amazing, and in most cases don't put that image of invitation in place. So I behoove all of us to be mindful of that and to make sure that when people are in our spaces, that they are recognized as being valuable individuals that are in those spaces, and that in fact we all thrive when we have a community that is representative, reflective, integrated. It's a much more vibrant and robust place. That's all I have to say.
And I say something too. So, the National Geographic story kind of parallels what Nick and Jeanette said too. We were founded as this local organization, a local membership organization in 1888. So imagine these rich, 33 rich white men founded this organization at the Cosmos Club, for the purpose of increasing and diffusing geographic knowledge. And when they talked about building the membership, they were not thinking of someone who looked like me. So the consequences over the years, the people we funded in their research and exploration looked like those folks. And that's who was on television. That's who was on the stage. And in the last 10, 15 years, we have made an intentional effort to expand that pool of talent. That's why we are setting up base camps all over the world to diversify who we're funding and hence who is on our stage. Knowing that who is on our stage is going to have a direct effect on who is in our audiences as well.
Jeanette, I want to just follow up. I was thinking as you were talking, sort of in that, do I feel comfortable there? Last year, through the DC Collaborative, we took several thousand children of varieties of ages from, I think, 3rd grade through seniors to see Alvin Ailey. The majority of the audience was young people of color, and it was, for the most of them, it was the first time they'd been in the Kennedy Center. It was probably the first time they'd seen another person of color dance in that format on the stage. But what was fascinating to me was to watch them as an audience, because they didn't have a clue, sort of, how to be an audience. And what was fabulous about it was nobody cared. They were the audience they wanted to be. They applauded when they thought it was fabulous. There were young people who could have cared less, and then all of a sudden something caught their attention and they were glued to the stage. There was a moment of expression looking out across the audience that adults rarely do anymore because we've been taught to be an audience. But I can only imagine not 1,500 or 4,000 or whatever it was in that auditorium, but if you were 10 of those young people scattered through the audience on any other given night, the sort of being uncomfortable would have been dynamic.
And only clap when everybody else watches.
I want to speak to the stories that we tell at our sites. We're a historic site. We tell the story of Abraham Lincoln's assassination primarily, and we don't talk about race very much at our site at the moment. Even though the proximal reason that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated was because he gave a speech in which he said that he wanted to offer the vote to some people of color, especially those who had fought in Louisiana. He gave that speech 3 days before he was assassinated. We don't talk about it a lot. And that is changing. And I think what we need to really be aware of is that the stories that we tell need to be of interest to the people that we're trying to bring to the site, and so, one of the most successful things for us has been doing a program called Civil War Washington for teachers, because we partner with other sites around the district, and we're actually telling a story that's helping them to teach Washington history. And Abraham Lincoln's assassination is a small part of that. But we're also saying, look at what downtown was like during the Civil War. That's what you can teach. And so...
it's so geographic.
It is. It's actually, we do a whole geography lesson at the beginning about the ridge of forts around the outside of the city. So I just think we need to be really looking at ourselves and at our own programming in ways that make... We can't say, why aren't you coming? We're teaching things that we want to teach that we've always taught, and not acknowledge that we need to listen to our audience, and we don't just need to listen to the audience that's currently coming. We need to identify who those people are who aren't coming and figure out how to make them feel welcome.
And can I just add that credibility, decision making, who is deciding who's telling the stories and who's telling the stories. Being a person of color at an institution that has predominantly not been one, and being allowed to provide some credibility and legitimacy as a person on that staff and helping to become a decision maker is huge. We now have hopefully a more representative body of individuals that are at that institution and are deciding and providing credibility to a variety of stories. That's critically important too. We can't have only one monolithic group that's making all of the decisions about the stories that are important to tell, the credibility of the art forms that are shared. It has to be a diverse group of people that are involved in that decision-making process as well.
Other questions?
We have over here, and then over here.
Okay.
I just have a sub question. I think it was an excellent point to bring about the psychological barriers and then some of the physical barriers like transportation. But what I heard from the panel today is a lot of your family-oriented programs are on Thursdays at 11 o'clock a.m. And just to bring, and Saturday, but just to bring some what we're working through as far as like providing access to rich resources to our families, is just realizing that we work with working class families.
Right.
And so the likelihood of them being able to like dedicate 11 o'clock midday on a Thursday is very, it's not likely at all. And so just being able to work beyond the normal hours to provide access, I think is something we've taken on board. And I wanted to know, are the institutions, other than Saturdays, because a lot of our families also work weekends to provide for their families. And so like, what are you guys open to expanding and going beyond your normal hours of operation and providing access to families that can come at 7 o'clock on a Saturday because they're off, or on the evenings or something like that. And food is also a big thing too, because they have families to feed, and so just being aware of those that those are also barriers.
I would just mention, and I forgot to say this earlier, the Kennedy Center is building an expansion. So if you've been driving by and seeing this building coming into your vision, in 2019 that space will be done. And among the things that we recognize there are wonderful spaces that are here in the city. But none of us alone can do this work. And so there's no reason that we can't have multiple interactive learning spaces like this beautiful one here, or at the Hirshhorn, or a number of or the libraries. So we are looking at extended hours, and one of the important things is absolutely talking to our communities to find the sweet spot of hours that works for people. But a lot of times, again, it's not only the timing, it's that people know about it. There's this expectation that the same methods of communication and marketing works for everybody, and it doesn't. There has to be, in some cases, a whole different level of guerrilla marketing, hand-to-hand, going out, talking to communities and saying, did you know we have a 6 o'clock show every night? Did you know? What would you like for us to do? Can we modify some of our hours? Can we make sure that we're mindful of when you actually can participate? Do we need to provide transportation for multiple location points beyond just the ones that we normally do? So it definitely takes some effort on our part, but I think we're working there, but we do need to hear more and more from our community and those that help to serve that community.
So we're meeting people where they are.
Yes.
All right. So I know that there's a question.
Yeah, one more thing. Last week I was at the session at your center there at the Sitar Center, and it was wonderful, and it opened my eyes to the possibilities that you were talking about, because the place was bustling with energy, but it's not something that National Geographic does, really, because we don't see that as our audience, but I'm thinking about it. Okay.
Hi, my name is Michelle Edwards. I'm the executive director at Live It, Learn It, and I'm sitting here with lots of thoughts. And mainly about equity and access. And so several of you talked about how your organizations are in strategic planning processes right now, and that's what's you guys need to be there if you're not. Because in that process, that's when you decide if you're willing to go to, Ward 8 and, change your hours. And so, you guys can say you're doing these things, and I believe you, but if in the strategic planning process, it's not outlined that we want to, reach this many children east of the river by this time, this is how we're going to do it, it's not going to happen. And so and I appreciate all of what you're doing. And Live and Learn, we can only serve so many people. And so we want to think about how we can continue to partner with you, because we are teaching them how to be in an audience. Because it is a little unfair to have kids thinking that they're behaving in a way that's appropriate, and then when they go to another place, when they go to New York on Broadway, and people look at them like they're crazy, which will make them not want to go again. And then also, how would 4,000 white children have behaved at Alvin Ailey? I don't know if it would have been very different. They're children, right? And so I just want us to be mindful of that, and think about ways to really put our, boots to the ground and go into those communities like Live and Learn does. But again, my colleagues back there, we're only able to see so many people because we are a small nonprofit with a moderate budget.
Right.
Modest budget.
Well, and to be quite truthful, when we asked the question about how do you define local, local was sort of geography. It wasn't, we didn't talk about it in terms of equal access. And I think even in some of our conversations that we've had, when you say, I want to do local work, doesn't necessarily mean you want to do equal access work. And so even that definition within strategic planning is important. There was one more question right here that you had. And then we need to wrap up because you guys have a half hour to talk to each other and talk to them as well again.
Well, first I'll just say thanks for talking about the need for programming to mimic this marketing when you're going into a new audience or a new community. It's one thing to say, hey, great, this is a new program we have, now come on and see us. It's another to say, oh, our programming actually represents this new neighborhood or this new geographic area. But I have a tactical question. A couple people have talked about ways in which either through marketing or through with development staff trying to explain this quality versus quantity in interactions. So I'm curious about what we're in an age of metrics, right? So what metrics are working? What ways of tracking these either continuing as in multiple touch points or different qualities of touch points are working in the different organizations here at the panel?
That's a hard one. Do you want to take it first?
Sure, I'll start first. So for us, we actually, as I mentioned, we have a research and evaluation arm at the Kennedy Center, and the beautiful thing is that we're working collaboratively with DC Public Schools, with our schools directly, with our programmers and research and evaluation to look at what is it that we're trying to look at, is it that we're trying to change. So in this case, we decided to dive into our residency programs, which are our ongoing programs with the sequential learning process between our teaching artists and teachers. But what's been exciting about this process is to actually sit down, what are the learning outcomes that the school system values? How can the research and evaluation arm at the school system plus research and evaluation at the Kennedy Center look at how that can push the agenda forward? How can our teachers and students how can our teachers and principals talk about how they want to impact and support the students? So designing a research agenda together is hugely important, and one that we can immediately look at impact back on the program design. So, being on the front end of that process so that we can look at an in-depth, ongoing, sequential, year after year engagement and look at longitudinal study, that's something that people are willing to invest in, and which we hope will have an impact beyond just our own programming, but for the field at large.
So the way I think about it is, it's ultimately, what's the stories that you can tell, and that's a combination of, we collect a lot of data, so we know, what percentage are repeat visitors, how many are new, ask all sorts of questions about where people come from, how they found out about it. That's for certain programs. Again, the youth programs, these in-depth programs, we're doing annual evaluations and following up on what these students are doing later after the program. So again, there's kind of I found that there's kind of no one method. It's really kind of what information can you collect. Some of it does depend on resources when it's the impact evaluations. But then what is the story that you can tell about what it is you want to do, what you want to accomplish?
Let me, need to say something because I'm ramping up.
Yeah, let me very quickly. I just want to say you can use pre-post tests to figure out what's being learned. You can use focus groups. The way we've been able to, you can do those things. Getting that stuff analyzed can be exhausting and expensive. And we have found that the best way for us to do evaluation of that kind is to apply for federal grants. Honestly. But I think you can also do it by applying for other kinds of grants. There are people out there who really want to fund evaluation, and you just have to know what the right time is to do it.
So let me, sorry, I have to say one more thing, just because we've had great, we've partnered with classes, evaluation classes, because there's so many universities in the area, and they will take it on as their semester project. And then also for marketing, research, all sorts of stuff. Highly recommended.
Let me wrap this up by asking Nick to talk a little bit about one of the things that we at the Collaborative are actually doing in regards to this data issue. And so if you would, you're a member of that committee, would you jump in here?
So thanks everybody for coming. Thanks Linda for moderating, Lissa. It's been a great discussion, and I think this is a great point to wrap up on and hopefully keep everybody engaged in the conversation. DC has received a National Endowment for the Arts grant for collective impact work in partnership with the Kennedy Center through the Any Given Child program. And we're working with the city government, with many partners, and with many of you that are in this room. So if you're interested in these kind of metrics, that's one of the kinds of things that will come out of this project, working together as a community. So I hope you'll talk to Jeanette, who's working on that, or Alyssa afterwards, and get more information about how you can provide input and be involved. So
it's a 2-year program. We're at the very beginning of it. So there's lots of opportunities to get involved. There's lots of opportunities to jump in and jump out, to come in, find out what's going on, stay in, work in the program. It's new for us. I want to thank my colleagues who have been with us, and I hope you'll share with me in thanking them. For the Smithsonian has allowed us to use the space out front, I think, to continue networking. The panelists will all be here for a while, so if you didn't get your question asked, run up and ask them. And I'm going to sort of extemporaneously, I think is the right word I want to use, but to go over here for a second and ask one more question. And that's to Dorothy. Because 20-some years ago, you must have sat in rooms with maybe not quite this many people, thinking about what this organization was going to be and how we were going to do it. And I just take a couple of minutes and give us your thoughts about 20 years of the Collaborative, and were you proud of what happened today?
Oh boy, I'm dying to jump in. Thank you very much. However, I think in part, I'm so proud of our member institutions here that are working so hard at it. And what I do remember and how the Collaborative came about was that we recognized, and many of us were on the boards and things, that there were wonderful arts programming and for our kids in DC, but there was no way to get them to it because the DC public schools suspended supporting transportation to the arts organizations, to the arts events. And so that was how the DC Collaborative, we had to get them there. We had the programs, they were there. There weren't anywhere near as many, and what I applaud is not only is the emphasis on this arts education and bringing educational programs from our member groups, but family programming, because you are seeing this sort of graduation and this continued effort to diversify, to have equitable access, and these collective impacts to measure that event. And so what's really happening here, I'm just so proud of our organization, the DC Collaborative, who is working so hard to have this happen and make it accessible to everybody. But there is this give and take here that is essential to all of these organizations getting your kids and getting our kids to these programs. How can we improve them? What is the access? What is the draw? What is the I think the force that will bring them and reach all of our boards, especially 7 and 8. We need to get them there. So just one last, what I would really like to also is that part of this is driven by the requests that you make to your city governments. And it's not just our DC government, but it is all the surrounding counties demand that you get support for arts education through these various councils and these commissions. This is where you step forward, whether you're a parent, whether you're an arts organization, they will have the money and the grants there if you keep pressing for it. So go to those city councils, go to those, and your state and your county ones too. They all have got funds, and they're all putting them out there for an arts education. Big drive now on arts education, and early education too is out there. I think diverse education. Tell your elected officials to get the money out there for them.
Amen.
Thank you, Dorothy. Melissa, last comments, and then let's go.
Let's go talk. Thank you so very much, Dorothy. I just want to thank you so much for coming today, for sharing that, and just to echo what you said, everyday advocacy is important, whether you're an educator or you run an arts or humanities organization. And most importantly, and not to put this gentleman on the spot because he's lovely and we don't want to chase him away, but we have a representative here today from the Office of Planning that's working on the DC Cultural Plan. So to speak to what Dorothy said in everyday advocacy, here is a group that wants to work with you on the implementation of what a cultural plan looks like to ensure that all of our residents, especially our youngest residents, have equitable access and are empowered to come to these very institutions that we work in and make them part of their own everyday life. So this is something that we see not just through the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities support or DC Public Schools making more of an investment, but every agency in DC government needs to be supporting equitable access to arts and humanities for our citizens, especially the students. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Nice meeting you. Thank you.
How's everything? We're going to do another tour.
Whenever. Yeah. Whenever, let me know. Yeah, it was the day you were sick, and then the lights went out or something. The power. Yeah. They didn't let me in. No. I guess came right to the outside building right when they were like, yeah, and